She thought her money gave her the right to do anything. She approached the royal guard, tried to pull off his hat, and called him a robot. The crowd laughed until he took a step forward. What happened next not only left her frozen in shame, but turned the guard into an internet hero. Now, imagine being there. Here's how it all started. London that day was the epitome of its reputation. Gray skies, an endless drizzle, and a sea of tourists swarming around Buckingham Palace. The city seemed determined to remind everyone of its timeless grandeur. Standing firm at his post was Guardsman Harold, a living emblem of tradition. Towering in his immaculate uniform, with a perfectly polished bearskin hat, he was the embodiment of discipline and pride. His face was carved in stone, unmoved, exuding the dignity of centuries-old customs. Among the throng of onlookers was a woman who stood out, not for her grace, but for her glaring bright pink puffer jacket and the oversized phone she wielded like a weapon. Her voice cut through the hum of the crowd like a foghorn, loud and grating, drawing eyes as she made her way to the front. She aimed her phone at Harold, zooming in dramatically, and let out a laugh that echoed through the square. "Hey, soldier boy, give us a smile, will ya? Or are you guys just robots in funny hats?" Her words hung in the air like an awkward joke at a family dinner. A few people chuckled nervously, but most just looked away, embarrassed for her. Harold, of course, remained as still as a statue, but her bravado only grew. "I paid good money to be here, you know," she declared, addressing no one in particular but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The least you could do is entertain us. Standing there like a mannequin, what's the point?" Still no reaction. Harold's resolve was ironclad, but you could feel the tension rising, like the first crack in a dam. Not content with just words, the woman rummaged in her bag and pulled out a small bottle of water. She held it up theatrically, as if performing for an invisible audience. "Maybe this will wake him up," she teased, tilting the bottle toward him. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and some even reached for their phones, sensing that things were about to escalate. She stopped short of pouring, laughing as if it were all just harmless fun. "Relax, people, it's just a joke," she said, her grin wide and smug. But the discomfort among the onlookers was palpable. Whispers began circulating. "What's wrong with her? Does she think this is a game?" Harold, meanwhile, stood unmoved. On the outside, he was the picture of calm, but inside, there was a storm brewing. His duty was clear, to remain steadfast, to embody the honor of his position. But there's only so much disrespect one can take before the line is crossed. The crowd grew quieter, waiting to see what would happen next. The woman, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere, seemed to thrive on the attention. "Come on, Mr. Serious, give me something, anything," she yelled, her voice carrying above the murmur of the square. The stage was set, the audience captivated. All eyes were on Harold. How long could he hold his ground, and how far would she go? As the drizzle persisted and the crowd began to thin, the woman in the pink puffer jacket remained steadfast. Her need for attention was unrelenting, and her next move? It was as audacious as it was infuriating. She sauntered up to Harold, the guardsman who had, thus far, handled her antics with the grace of a seasoned professional. But she was determined to get a reaction. Leaning in far closer than anyone dared, she reached out and tugged at the brim of his iconic bearskin hat. "Come on, robot, show us what's underneath." Her tone was half mocking, half commanding. The square seemed to hold its breath. A few remaining tourists turned their heads, phones discreetly, and not so discreetly, raised. This was the kind of spectacle people didn't want to miss. And then, something rare happened. Harold moved, a single deliberate step forward. His posture remained pristine, his face still as granite, but his presence now carried an undeniable weight. When he spoke, his voice cut through the damp air like a whip. "Ma'am," he said, his tone steady and unyielding, "you have crossed a boundary. Step back immediately." For a second, it was as though time had frozen. The woman's smirk faltered. "Wait, what? You can talk?" she stammered, her voice an awkward mix of disbelief and nervous laughter. the bravado drained from her face as the ripple of reactions from the onlookers began. "That's what you get," someone murmured from the crowd, followed by a smattering of applause. It was clear that most were rooting for Harold. The woman's earlier antics, once amusing to a few, now seemed childish at best and outright disrespectful at worst. But before she could recover, a small child, no older than 6, stumbled into the scene. The girl, distracted by the commotion, tripped and fell directly into the path of another guardsman's horse. Gasps erupted, and the world seemed to shift into slow motion. Without hesitation, Harold broke protocol. In a blur of precision and urgency, he stepped out of formation, scooped the child into his arms, and carried her to safety. The guardsman with the horse expertly adjusted his mount, avoiding what could have been a disastrous situation. The applause this time was deafening. Tourists cheered, clapped, and even shouted words of admiration. Harold set the child down gently, ensuring she was unscathed, before returning to his post as if nothing had happened. And then there was the woman in the pink jacket. Pale and visibly shaken, she looked around, realizing just how ridiculous she appeared. The crowd's gaze shifted toward her, and their judgment was as loud as the applause had been. "You almost turned this into a tragedy with your little joke," a voice rang out. "Shame on you." Others nodded, muttering their agreement. The woman tried to shrink into her jacket, but the damage was done. Her earlier arrogance now looked pitiful in the face of Harold's quiet heroism. As Harold adjusted his hat and resumed his position, the crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the events they'd just witnessed. The moment was over, but its impact lingered. For Harold, it was another day on duty. For everyone else, it was a reminder of what respect and honor truly mean. The woman in the pink jacket, visibly rattled, tried to make her exit. Her earlier confidence was now replaced with a desperate attempt to blend into the thinning crowd. But as she shuffled away, a sharp voice from somewhere in the audience rang out, "We've got it all on video." The words hit her like a thunderclap. She froze, her face flushing crimson. Slowly she turned, scanning the sea of phones pointed her way. If she had hoped her antics would be forgotten, this was her rude awakening. The crowd murmured in agreement, with scattered voices chiming in, "Serves her right." Finally, someone stood up to people like her. Meanwhile, Harold, unbothered by the unfolding spectacle, adjusted his bearskin hat with the precision of a craftsman and resumed his post. His movements were deliberate, calm, and unwavering, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. That was Harold, duty before drama. The internet, however, had other plans. Within hours, videos of the scene began circulating across social media platforms, accompanied by fiery captions like, "Royal Guard saves child, humiliates disrespectful tourist," honoring tradition, the guard who restored dignity. The comment sections lit up like fireworks. People from around the globe chimed in, their emotions running high. "This guardsman is a legend." Finally, someone showing these entitled tourists what respect looks like. She thought she was funny. Well, the joke's on her. Of course, the woman in the pink jacket couldn't ignore the backlash. Her face, frozen in shock and later shame, was now immortalized in countless viral posts. In a half-hearted attempt to salvage her reputation, she took to her own social media, posting a tearful apology. "I realize now that my actions were thoughtless and disrespectful. I deeply regret my behavior," she wrote, framing herself as someone who had simply misunderstood the culture. The response was, unsurprisingly, brutal. Comments flooded in, most of them variations of the same sentiment. Too late for that. Actions have consequences. Maybe next time, think before you act. Ironically, Harold likely never saw any of it. Social media was a world he had little time for. For him, this was just another day in a long career of standing tall, representing a centuries-old tradition that demanded the highest levels of discipline and honor. As the drizzle turned into a steady rain, Harold remained steadfast. Tourists continued to come and go, some snapping pictures, others casting lingering glances of respect. For those who had witnessed the events of the day, it wasn't just about Harold's actions. It was a reminder that even in an era where everything is disposable and traditions often feel forgotten, there are still moments that demand respect. Harold's quiet resolve stood in stark contrast to the chaotic entitlement of the woman in the pink jacket, and that contrast left a mark. The crowd may have moved on, but the story of Harold, the guardsman who protected both a child and a tradition, would linger in their minds and their timelines for a long time to come.